Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Wellbe podcast. This podcast is designed to help you learn, expand what you thought was possible, and become as empowered as you can be in your health. Thanks for tuning in today. We've got a great new episode with Maria Marlowe, a holistic health coach and nutritionist who has focused her work on skin health. In this episode, we go deep into the causes of acne and how to prevent and heal the awful skin condition. Whether acne is something you've struggled with or you just get the occasional pimple around your period, this episode is for you because we all need to understand what actually causes it and therefore how we can prevent it. Before we jump in, I want to give a shout out to Donna Lynn 33, or as she is known, who wrote, "Everyone should listen to these interviews to know what is going on in the medical world and avoid all the crazy things that can go wrong. Listen to this podcast if you want to start your health education journey, be more knowledgeable, and be empowered about your health." Thank you so much, Donna Lynn. Now, if you want a shout out from me in a future episode, please leave the Wellbe podcast a quick review right now. It takes less than a minute. Scroll to the bottom of our podcast page in your podcast app and click write a review. Leave a couple stars and a couple words and then press submit and you're done. All right, now this episode is jam-packed, so let's jump right in with Maria Marlowe. Maria, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Adrienne.
You're so welcome. So I wanted to have you on to help my listeners understand the very common issue, but also depending on the severity of it, the very intense and serious issue of acne. So of course, that's a wide range. Acne can be the occasional pimple here and there, or it can be, cystic and pervasive and not just on your face, all over your body, and really detrimental to your life and really like a systemic health issue in your body. So Maria is going to share with us everything that she has learned from her personal experience and her work on this topic. So first of all, Maria, what causes acne?
Well, the simplest and most direct answer is simply inflammation. And I think this may surprise a lot of people because most people think that acne is caused by bacteria, right? Most of our acne products, whether they're drugstore products or even pharmaceuticals, right? The most commonly prescribed drug for acne is antibiotics. And back in the 50s, it was believed that acne was a bacterial infection. But starting in the 80s, the research started to tell us otherwise. And it started pointing towards inflammation. So this chronic systemic body-wide inflammation. And decades of data started to pile up. And by the early 2000s, acne was reclassified from a bacterial infection to an inflammatory condition. Now, this is a huge paradigm shift in how we understand acne. And this should have caused a paradigm shift in how we treat acne, but it hasn't. We are still treating acne like the 80s and, kind of even the 50s, right? In terms of really relying on antibiotics instead of focusing on reducing inflammation. And in my work, what I've realized and, just going through so much research over these years, I find that there's really 6 key factors. So the chronic inflammation, that's a big one, which can come from eating a pro-inflammatory diet. Also, there's lifestyle factors that contribute to inflammation, like lack of sleep or stress. Nutrient deficiencies. There is a lot of documentation on certain nutrient deficiencies being associated with acne. So, for example, vitamin A, zinc, omega-3. We know that gut dysbiosis is also associated with acne, and gut dysbiosis contributes to inflammation, right? So there's like a whole chain. Everything in our body is connected, right? There's, your skin is not separate from your gut and anything else in your body. Hormone imbalance is associated with acne. Stress, your thoughts can actually cause your hormones to change in your body, to the release of different hormones in your body that cause your skin to excrete more sebum. It increases your inflammation, right? And then the last one is overly harsh skincare products, which are becoming more and more popular. These 10-step skincares, these very strong acids and peels and all these things. But for the most part, those first 5 things I mentioned, inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, gut dysbiosis, hormone imbalance, and stress, these are all or mainly caused by our diet and lifestyle habits. So inflammation causes acne, but I think the most important takeaway is that you have so much control over your inflammation levels through your diet and lifestyle habits.
Yes. And as you were talking about the 6 things that you'd identified, I was thinking about how connected they all were to one another, right? Because inflammation contributes to gut dysbiosis, and a pro-inflammatory diet also is very connected to gut dysbiosis, but also hormonal imbalance, the gut and the hormone connection, and the stress, which we can call, mental health, I guess, all super connected through the vagus nerve and affects the gut lining and contributes to leaky gut and all these things that I've been able to hear about from various like internal medicine and gut health experts. And I just can't believe how connected food is, but also the lifestyle things you were talking about, to whether or not you have terrible skin, you get your period, you feel mentally well, you digest your food. I mean, it's all just one amazing system, which we know. So on the topic of hormones and acne, I sort of get it, but I would love for you to explain it more. But why do certain times of the month or certain periods, especially for women, contribute to acne? So, there's sort of premenstrual acne usually, and or different times in your life, right? Like there's a lot more acne when you're a teenager and your hormones are changing, or you're just getting your menstrual cycle set than, other times when you might be 30, 40 years old.
Yeah, so there are definitely periods in our life where acne seems to be more common, right? Like you mentioned, before a period or during a period, and then also during puberty. And a lot of people make the assumption that because it's so common, it's normal. Like this is a normal part of being a woman. This is a normal part of being a teenager and going through puberty. But the reality is it's common, but it's not normal. Acne is a sign of inflammation and imbalance within period. And we'll go through the details of it. But even if we just look at other communities, other places in the world, other times in history, places where people were consuming a whole unprocessed diet, places where the Western diet didn't, invade yet, acne is pretty much non-existent, even to this day in rural parts of certain parts, like, in a rural part of Egypt where there is no access to processed and packaged foods, the acne rate is incredibly low. Like I read one study, it was like less than 2%. There were other skin issues that people had, but the acne rate amongst adolescents was 2%. In the US, it's upwards of 90 to 95%, which is crazy. But then if you look at the acne rate of Egyptians in a major city like Alexandria, it's more on par with the American kids, right? It's not as high, but it's like between 30 to 70%. Okay. So people know not everyone who goes through puberty or who has a period is going to get acne. So let's talk about them separately. First, with your period. When you're menstruating, your menstrual cycle, or the average menstrual cycle, I should say, is about 28 days, right? And there is a certain rhythm that our hormones are going to fluctuate during this time. So the first half of the cycle, estrogen is elevated. The second half of the cycle, progesterone rises. And then right before your period starts, estrogen and progesterone drop, right? And because they've now dropped, your testosterone levels relatively are higher than they usually are the rest of the month. So when you read or ask, why do women break out around this time? The common response is either because of the rise in progesterone or because that relatively higher amount of testosterone. Because we know, for example, with testosterone, high levels of testosterone are associated with an increase in sebum production and increased cell turnover. So in other words, high testosterone levels or excess testosterone, it clogs your pores, and this leads to breakouts. But we have to ask, all women who are menstruating are going through a similar cycle. Why is it that some people break out and others don't? And I think that comes down to how their body is metabolizing and dealing with those hormones. In my opinion, the women who are breaking out or having, PMS and period issues, period breakouts, they're most likely constipated, quite frankly. They're not releasing their excess hormones. Now, there can be other issues. Maybe their liver is not breaking down the hormones properly. But I would say what I've seen is often linked to constipation, because as you mentioned earlier, our gut health and our hormones are really intertwined. So once our body uses a hormone and it's done doing its job, it's sent to the liver to be broken down and packaged up for export. And it goes to your gut and it leaves our body via our bowel movements. Now, if you're constipated, those hormones are sitting in your gut and they can get reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. And this contributes then to hormonal imbalance and excess hormone levels. But if you're eliminating regularly and you're getting rid of those excess hormones, you shouldn't have a problem.
Or your liver isn't functioning right, like you said, so it's not even getting to the poop that's then leaving. It's almost like that package got left off the truck because your liver was still dealing with it, you know?
Yes. So that's exactly what I was about to say. So the other issue is your liver. So if your liver is sluggish, we're overloading it with toxins, and they're everywhere. They're kind of unavoidable in this day and age. But so it's not just overloading our liver with toxins, but are we supporting our liver? Are we giving our liver the nutrients that it needs to perform its detoxification processes? Yes, the liver is a detox organ, but it also needs certain nutrients in order to perform those functions, right? So we know, for example, cruciferous vegetables are very liver supportive. They help with detoxification. We know certain herbs are liver supportive, for example, milk thistle, right? So the liver could be the issue, the constipation could be an issue. And then also I feel like commonly there are some nutrient deficiencies associated with PMS as well, because PMS, whether or not you have period breakouts, if you have PMS, like cramps, and other issues, there's usually some sort of nutrient balance also involved in the mix.
Fascinating. Yes, I learned recently, which is shocking because it's like, well, you said just because it's common doesn't make it normal. And I am such a cautionary tale of that because one of my few health problems in life was lifelong period cramps from when, I was 12 years old and first got my period and thought it was normal, thought that everybody dealt with them, and they would be debilitating at times, especially in my teenage years and in my college years before I really started to take care of my body better and learned a lot about gut health and improved all of that. But one thing I just recently found out was that I had a double genetic mutation on not the main estrogen source, but sort of a side one. And so my body just does not detox out or send, the right amount to the liver, or the liver has trouble, getting it out because of this genetic mutation, or processing it rather. And so, it's not the worst it could be, meaning if you have the worst one, you might have a condition more like PCOS or something that's much more extreme instead of just period cramps, but it is there. And so for me, it was actually very empowering because first of all, I just love understanding the why behind things. And that's also why I love doing interviews like this, because people should understand the why behind the pimple, not just try to get rid of the pimple each time it comes, but more so that there was an understanding that I need to do more than the average person for my liver and for doing things for estrogen metabolization, but also estrogen, like not having excess estrogen in my system. I already do a ton as far as that, trying not to have fake estrogens in my products and plastics and things like that. But, there are detox practices like you were talking about that really support the liver, and certain herbs that support the liver, and certain types of food, cruciferous vegetables, et cetera. And so some people think genetics are destiny or a way of kind of being like, well, there's nothing I can do. And for me, it was the opposite. I thought, okay, so I need to do a little bit more, and that's fine. I just need to commit to those things now that I know I need to do more. So everything that you were saying about how the liver takes things out and therefore how it might affect a woman's period, whether that's cramps or skin issues, or at certain times in her life when hormones are changing dramatically, right? Puberty or menopause or something like that. And puberty happens to both men and women. That's why we see acne on, both men and women teenagers. Right. So yeah, it's all very, very relevant to me.
Yeah. And with the puberty, I think it kind of goes back to those 6 factors. So like with the period, the hormones, go up and down in sort of a rhythm or a dance. With puberty, there are certain hormonal changes that take place. But again, why does almost every teenager in America get acne? But you go to other places in the world and they don't. Even if we look back through history, for example, the Inuits in Canada, before they were, the Canadian government forced them to assimilate into Canadian culture and eat Canadian foods and live in these camps. They were subsisting on a traditional diet that was like berries and greens and fish and, all whole, real foods, a lot of omega-3 in the diet. Acne was pretty much non-existent. And then once they were forced to assimilate, and they were eating cereal and cookies and all the foods that American or, Canadian kids were eating, their acne rates and their chronic disease rates also started to skyrocket and started to go more in line with, anyone else living a Western style diet, eating these high glycemic foods. So with puberty, I think it also, things that we need to think about is inflammatory foods or any other sources of inflammation. When we think of a teenage diet, it's a lot of packaged processed foods typically. So pro-inflammatory foods, nutrient deficiencies. Again, if you're eating mostly processed and packaged foods, you're not eating enough fresh fruits and vegetables, not enough whole foods. You could be missing out on a lot of critical nutrients. Gut dysbiosis, you can't rule that out because by the time that kids hit puberty in the US, it's possible they've been on antibiotics several times, already. And we know that each time we have antibiotics, it's taking a toll on our gut microbiome. So that could be an issue. Hormonal imbalance. So again, that could be that constipation issue, right? So if they're not eating enough fiber, not excreting regularly, maybe they're not excreting the hormones properly. Maybe it's that liver issue. Fatty liver disease is becoming more and more common in teenagers and, and children even. So there might be issues with the liver. It's all the same thing. Stress. Kids are stressed out these days. We have social media, we have tests, we have school, we have all these things going on. The news in and of itself is terrifying to an adult, let alone a child. So it's all the same factors.
I feel for the teenagers of today between the diets that do absolutely nothing for them and are harmful, and then the social media and the news cycle. And I think you understand that food can be very supportive to mental health or not. And so if you're eating things and not getting proper sleep or having too much blue light exposure or whatever, you are going to have a worse stress response in your body to any little thing, right? Because it's not like kids didn't have school tests and, bullies 100 years ago, but they did not have as much inflammation in the diet and as much blue light, disrupting their sleep. So it just has compounded their ability to or inability to deal with normal, kid stressors. So that's also, it's just this very insane vicious circle. But I wanted to ask you too, and I want to hammer this home because I think sometimes people are very visual or they just need to understand how something works physically in order to really get it. How do we go from eating pizza, for example, a common inflammatory food, let's say, and have it turn into, acne or pockmarks or whatever on their face? How does that process happen?
Yeah, because traditionally we're kind of taught that everything is separate, right? And exists in its own little silo.
I think a lot of people think you've got this gut system and it's one track, which it is, and that things come in and leave and that it's really this. But then they're very confused by how does something then leave that process and end up on your face?
Yeah, well, I think another reason that this compartmentalization of our organs exists is because when we look at Western medicine, there's a doctor for skin, there's a doctor for your gut, there's a doctor for your hormones, right? There's a doctor for your reproductive system. So it's all separated. And of course, there's different nuance and specific things about each system, but it's important to remember they're all interrelated and they're all, what happens in one is affecting the other. So let's use your example of pizza. Pizza was my favorite food. When I had acne, pizza was my favorite.
It's most people, certainly my favorite food, hands down.
Yeah. When I say favorite, I literally ate pizza every single day of my life, probably for years, as a teen. And so what's going on with the pizza? Well, one, let's talk about the gluten, right? The crust that comes from wheat. So one issue with gluten is that it can lead to something called increased intestinal permeability. So research shows that when we ingest gluten, and the amount of this response really depends on your genetics. Some people are going to have like a stronger response. Some people are going to have less of a response. But when we ingest gluten and it goes down into our gut, it causes our body to produce a protein called zonulin. And this zonulin acts kind of like a little key to open up the door between your the cells that are lining, like your intestinal lining. So your intestinal lining, if you think of it as a tube, the lining is actually just one cell thick. So the way that I like to explain it is if you think about a single file line of people, right? Their arms are all linked. So they basically created a human wall, and each person is one cell, and where their arms are linked, that is the tight junction, right? And so usually that wall is keeping the food and the bacteria and the toxins, it's keeping that in your gut, and it's letting things like nutrients pass out into your bloodstream. But what happens when we eat gluten and our body produces zonulin like knocks, causes those two people or those two cells to unlink for a little while. And now larger particles can pass through your intestinal lining. So toxins, bacteria, these things can go into your bloodstream, and they're not supposed to be in your bloodstream. And this creates an inflammatory immune response. So as we mentioned earlier, systemic or body-wide inflammation is believed to be the primary contributing factor to acne. So we have inflammation in our body, and then the inflammation goes to our skin. And if you think about like acne, it's inflammation of your skin, right? It's a bump, it's a red raised inflammation. So that is one example. When we eat something like gluten, it can lead to increased intestinal permeability that creates inflammation in the body. And then that inflammation can then end up on our skin. So that's one way. If we look at the top of the pizza, the cheese, another favorite food of mine, dairy is one of the most well-established acne trigger. There are plenty of studies suggesting that dairy intake is associated with an increased risk of acne. Doesn't matter the type of dairy, there's many different forms of dairy, but increased intake of dairy is associated with increased risk of acne. And now, just to throw this out there, this doesn't mean every single person that eats dairy will necessarily break out, but in susceptible individuals, which is a large portion of the population, dairy can create inflammation and lead to breakouts. So how does that happen? Dairy can be high glycemic, right? It can increase insulin. And when our insulin increases, this sets off this cascade of hormones, which again can kind of turn on those oil spigots in our skin, and sort of prompt those sebaceous glands to produce more oil. And that clogs our pores, and that leads to breakouts.
Got it. Wow. That is so much fabulous information. I feel like the people with the arms linked, I really hope that resonates for people. It's a great visual depiction of what's happening and them sort of separating their arms a bit as they eat that pro-inflammatory food, whether it's gluten or dairy or both, or other things that maybe their body is just considering to be inflammatory that maybe somebody else's isn't, like soy, some people are okay with, some people really can't handle that. And so there's also a unique aspect to like what's going to make those guys separate their arms and let bad things pass through into your bloodstream and onto your face. So it's very nuanced, but that was a great explanation. Thank you. So along those same lines, we know that food, obviously, from everything you've just said, and the state of your gut health play a large role in other skin conditions like eczema and psoriasis, but in different ways. So can you give us a quick explanation on the difference between those skin conditions and how, for example, eczema would manifest versus acne?
Yeah, so acne, eczema, and psoriasis, these are all considered inflammatory conditions or inflammatory skin conditions. They are all associated with gut dysbiosis. They're all associated with different nutrient deficiencies. So there are a lot of commonalities, and it's not uncommon for someone to have more than one of these issues. because there are a lot of the same root causes. But in terms of why one manifests, like inflammation for me, it manifests as acne, inflammation for someone else manifests as eczema, let's say, or someone else it's psoriasis. That I don't know if there's a great answer for that, but I would imagine it's some combination of genetics and history and, environment and all of these factors and probably more. But another key difference amongst these is that psoriasis, for example, this is considered an autoimmune disease. So this is a bit different than acne and eczema. Acne and eczema, there's inflammation involved with them, but they're not considered autoimmune. Another interesting thing about psoriasis is that there's a process called angiogenesis that takes place, which is basically your body creates blood vessels that basically kind of create those plaques, like those signature red plaques on the body. So that's also, a disease of the blood vessels or a condition of the blood vessels, I should say. So psoriasis is, autoimmune. There's vasculature involved, and that's that. Eczema is generally believed to be caused by either some issue with the skin barrier that is causing, transepidermal water loss. So basically letting moisture out, but letting germs in. Or it could be some sort of like immune response to or inflammatory response to some sort of irritant. So if we think of something like seborrheic dermatitis, right, which is like scalp eczema, basically, that is believed to be triggered by the yeast, the Malassezia yeast. So Malassezia is actually a common part of the human skin microbiome. Everybody has it, but some people, for some reason, they have an inflammatory response to this yeast, and it creates flakes and dandruff and that itchy, flaky skin.
Oh, it's not an excess of that yeast. It's the body's inflammatory response to that yeast in the body.
Yes, it could, it could be an excess. Well, that's the interesting thing. That's actually a great point that you bring up, because Malassezia is considered a commensal yeast, but when it either grows out of control or in certain genetically predisposed individuals, they have this, I guess, hypersensitive response to it. You don't necessarily want to kill it entirely, but you want to rein it in, and you want to make sure the good guys in that microbiome are keeping it in check.
We'll be right back with Maria Marlowe after this quick message. I don't know about you, but I never listen to the end of a podcast anymore, so I'm hopping in here to let you know that the best way to stay empowered and on top of your health is to be in the WellBe community. So head to getwellbe.com/subscribe to make sure you're in like Flynn. On getwellbe.com, you'll learn about my private holistic patient advocacy work, my programs to help you go deeper and make life-altering changes to your health, and our awesome non-toxic product database. If you're more of a social media person, let's be friends on Instagram. You can find me at getwellbe. Okay, now back to the lovely Maria Marlowe.
A question for you back to acne, Maria. Is there such thing as an acne delay? Like, how soon after you feel stressed or, eat pizza or whatever it is, do people typically then have it come out on their face? Is it as fast as, a couple of hours later? Is it a day? Is it a week? It seems like if people are going to try to change their diet and lifestyle, they first have to understand when it comes and then think back to maybe what they were doing or eating. And so helping to understand the timing, I think, is useful.
Yeah, it really depends, because we each have our own metabolism and biochemistry and all of that, right? So the best thing I think that people can do is keep a food and symptom diary and track what you're eating, but also track what's happening with your skin, maybe your digestive system, your mood, energy, all of those things. And you can start to draw connections. Typically, once we eat something, it will show up pretty soon after. So a day, maybe 2 days. It's probably not going to take a week. It's probably going to be within a day or two for most people. So if you keep your food diary for one day, like let's say, this is something that I did when I had acne and was trying to figure out what was going on. I could see very clearly that when I ate pizza for dinner, I woke up the next morning and I had a huge breakout. But when I ate vegetables and wild salmon, that breakout started to go down, started to get less red. The bump started to go down. And after a while of doing this and playing this game of, what breaks me out, what makes my skin clear, it was quite evident actually. And after a couple of weeks, you'll start to pick up these signs, and then you can start making changes. And you mentioned this before, that we each also have our own food sensitivity. So there are some food sensitivities that are quite common, like dairy or gluten. A lot of people have these, but you could be sensitive to really any food, especially a food that you eat a lot of. So that's why a food diary can be helpful, because you may see like your favorite food that you love for whatever reason. Every time that you eat it, you have some sort of negative health outcome. It'll help you to start connecting those dots.
Yeah. And you just made me realize, we just recently put out a WellBe guide to elimination diets, because over and over and over, we see how incredibly important they are and how they're really the gold standard, according to many, many experts that we know in this field, the field being gut health, and for so many diseases, to understand food intolerances, sensitivities, all of that, more than any, test that you can order. And so we decided it was worth putting a whole guide out there. And I wasn't thinking about the skin aspect. You can 100% do an elimination diet based on just not tracking digestive symptoms, which is, of course, what most people think of, but just tracking your acne and your skin, and seeing, based on certain things that you've taken out and then adding them back in, whether you then get acne. So I think that's really cool. And I hadn't thought about that aspect of doing tracking.
Yeah. I even tell people I have a 3-day meal plan for your skin on my website. It's free. And I tell people, take a picture on day 0 and then take a picture on day 3 or day 4. And you'll see the difference very, very quickly. And in some cases overnight, you can start to see these changes, because food is really powerful. I think it's another point to drive home to people, because the idea of changing your diet in order to clear your skin can seem like a big step. Like most people would rather just put some cream on their face and call it a day. But the reality is that when you're using topicals and things like that, you're always going to be using them to some extent. Most people are using them for years. But with food, like we think, oh, it's going to take me years for my skin to clear with food. No, it takes days, weeks, months. It actually works quite quickly. And people are often really surprised to see just how quickly they can see a change in their skin.
That's awesome and super empowering. My next question was on that topic. For people that have had, a long history of acne or very serious cystic acne, is it something based on your personal experience, turning your acne situation around, that you always have to manage? Meaning, if you have a couple of days of bad eating for a wedding weekend or something like that, is your face going to flare up with acne? Or do you really feel like you, in the process of clearing up your acne years ago, have really put it behind you? And if you have a bad weekend of eating, maybe you have no acne or one random pimple, but you're not flaring up with acne the way that we think about it now.
Yeah, I think anyone can really heal their skin, because acne is not like a bad skin problem. It's a habit issue. Like it's an issue of inflammation, and it's an issue of imbalance that we have more control over than we realize. It's not going to necessarily be easy. It's going to be hard. Changing your diet and lifestyle is not easy. It takes commitment. It takes time. There will be up and downs. It's not a straight upward trajectory, but you can certainly get yourself to a place where your gut is in a better place, where your inflammation levels are in a better place, where your hormones are in a better place, your blood sugar, all of these things. If you can get your body back into balance, then having a slice of pizza or a wedding weekend, where you go crazy or whatever it is, it's not going to impact you as much. Just to give you an example of, in my own experience, if I, like back in the day, if I were to have a piece of pizza, I could literally see the next morning it was on my face. I had a pizza face. My face was completely broken out. Now that my gut is healed, my hormones are balanced, my inflammation levels are low, I could have a slice of pizza and be totally fine. So your threshold is increased. Now, if I were to eat pizza every day like I used to, I will break out, and I've tested this out recently in Italy. And yes, I will break out at some point, but
okay, so how many days in a row do you have to eat pizza to break out?
I'd say 3.
I think 3 is a good number for all kinds of things, right? Because like 1 is could be a one-off, 2, you're on your way, 3, you're doing it. That's great to know. Okay, so everybody keep that number in mind. One day bad eating is not going to affect you, but you have to do the work first, is what you're saying.
You have to do the work first. Because your health is a reflection of what you do most of the time, not what you do once in a while. So if the vast majority of the time you're eating healthy foods, if you go off track a little bit once in a while, it's really not a big deal. And you can track, like if you want to track things, you can totally track things. So if you're dealing with acne now, you might want to go get your inflammation levels tested. You might want to go get your fasting insulin levels tested, your blood sugar, your hormones even. You might do a gut test, right? You can get these markers tested, and then you can track your progress as well. Like some people like to see the numbers and they like to see that difference. For some people, just seeing it on their skin is enough, but you could certainly do that. And that might also give you some encouragement because like I said, it's not like your skin's not going to clear overnight. It will start to slowly and surely get better. Your breakouts will start to become less and less. You may notice that you used to always break out around your period. Now maybe it's just, half as much as, you used to, or eventually like it stops, but in that process, if you were to then retest your blood markers, you may start to see these levels going down or going in the right direction. And that may give you the confidence to keep up with these new habits.
Amazing. So just circling back, because we're almost out of time, which is crazy, to the 6 things that you mentioned as the root causes of acne. Say somebody goes through their diet and lifestyle and evaluates and realizes that they have or are doing all 6, right? Like my gut's messed up, my diet isn't great, I do have a lot of uncontrolled stress, you name it. I'm not sleeping well, or I'm not sleeping enough, because I think it's very hard to do total lifestyle diet transformation all at once. I'd like to think that you start really focusing on one thing for a couple of weeks only, and then you can sort of like add them back in like a juggler, right? You can't juggle 10 things at once. You start juggling 2 or 3, and then you got it, and then you throw in the 4th. So what do you think is the best of the 6, if you've got them all, to start with, to make sure that, you start seeing progress right away, and then you can add in a few of the others?
Well, I think that also really depends on the individual, like what is their primary leading factor? Because yes, some people may have, all of these factors. I know I did. Some people might have 1, 2, or 3, but we're going to all have them in different amounts. So like, for example, if your stress level is out of control and like, you're just in a job where you're always on edge and like you're always working and you're always burnt out and like, like your stress is your biggest factor, then you can eat all the broccoli and, sweet potatoes and whatever wild salmon that you want. Like, you're still going to be in this fight or flight mode, and you're not going to be able to heal. We need to get the body into the rest and digest. So for this person, I would say working on your stress is actually the first thing. And then giving that person a strict diet is probably going to stress them out more. So working on stress reduction techniques. Can we try meditation? Can we try breath work, breathing techniques? Like breathing is such an amazing, easy way to kind of shift our body into that parasympathetic nervous system. So that's one example. If someone is just like eating a ton of sugar, let's say a lot of refined and processed foods, and that is their main problem, then that's where I would start. We would focus on adding in more of the anti-inflammatory foods and starting to crowd out some of those processed refined foods. And then last thing I'll say, like a good place for a lot of people to start though is the gut, because gut health is so pivotal to our skin health and our overall health. If we're not digesting our food properly, we're not absorbing our nutrients properly, like again, it won't matter if we're eating healthy foods because we're not getting all the goodness from it we can. The gut is also a source of inflammation, right? So I would say the food in the gut for a lot of people is the first place to start, removing the inflammatory foods. But again, if you're a person that's under stress, then definitely stress is the first place to start.
Got it. I think, right. So you'd sort of go through the 6, and if one was so alarming, like, well, my diet's okay. And, my stress is, okay, but I'm sleeping like 3 hours a night because I'm working on a new project. And even if it's not stressful, like it's exciting, but I'm hardly sleeping, you'd be like, whoa, let's take a couple of weeks to sleep first and then start, working on the other things. So that makes sense to me. It's kind of like, where's the biggest fire for that person?
Exactly.
Put that out first. So, and I think one thing to make sure people understand, because you made the distinction between, food and the gut, the health of your gut being like the 2 biggest, factors in whether or not you have acne. The difference, because a lot of people think your gut health is really what you eat or don't eat, is that a lot of things contribute to the health of your gut, including medication use, over the counter and prescription, the quality and quantity of the water that you drink, other sorts of liquids, obviously food as well, environmental pollutants that might be in your home that are then making their way into your lungs. And then, it could also end up in your gut as well. So a lot of different things contribute to the gut. I will make a small plug for the free WellBe Gut Health Guide, which you can download on getwellbe.com to understand the things that really help and harm gut health. Again, like Maria was saying, a large percentage of those things is food, but there are many more. And so that's also what she was alluding to in the distinction between just food and the state of your gut. One more little question I just thought of. As a new mom, I noticed, and a lot of parents will relate to this, baby acne. Babies have a lot of random things happening to their skin when they're very little. And, my son didn't have any solids at all or formula really until he was, I think we started solids at 5 months and a bottle of formula at like the 6 or 7 month state. But he had plenty of things going on with his skin that looked like baby acne from, a day or 2 old. And so I never understood what that was, because it's not food per se. Of course, I eat food and make breast milk, but do you know anything about why babies get acne and what causes it?
So I'm not an expert in this area, and there are people who specialize specifically in pediatric and even infantile acne and nutrition. But for my research, I found that there's basically 2 types of baby acne. There's the neonatal acne, which is, say, babies under 6 weeks or so. And then there's the infantile acne, which is from, say, 2-3 months to like 16 months, right? For the neonatal acne, this is not actually real acne, and this is the more common one. So this apparently affects about 20% of babies before the age of 6 weeks. And this is actually caused by that Malassezia yeast that we were talking about earlier. So Malassezia is, again, it's a commensal yeast that is found naturally in the skin microbiome, but for some reason, we don't exactly know why, some babies have an inflammatory immune response to this yeast, and that creates what looks like little pimples on their face. And this generally just resolves on its own. For the slightly older infants, that affects less than 2%. So that's a little bit less common, but we don't really know exactly why it's happening. The common hypothesis is that it has something to do with hormones, with excess androgens, whether it's coming from the mother's milk or, maybe just the baby itself. But my guess is there may also be some inflammation in there, maybe some gut issues, who knows, maybe even stress, right? Because let's say, I don't know, a baby's doing sleep training or something and is left to cry. Like maybe that's stressing the baby out. I don't know. I'm just, hypothesizing.
Yeah. Certainly they're getting foods, right? Because if a baby has a dairy sensitivity, the nursing mother can't have dairy, right? So they're getting things in the breast milk that are a result of the foods that the mother eats. So like you said, completely makes sense that if the mother is passing along something that the baby would have an inflammatory response to, that it could get acne from it. I think there's not enough awareness about how much the mother's breast milk and what she's eating and consuming and her own hormone levels as she's then making the breast milk and passing along to the baby affect that baby's skin and
gut and everything
and all of that. Yeah. Certainly eczema, but also baby acne. I think most people think it's this kind of just like random harmless thing that happens to babies, and they're not thinking about it as an inflammatory response to something in the breast milk, or even to stress from, cry it out method or whatever. I was very lucky to not have to do that with my son, but I'm sure he's been stressed in other ways.
And maybe it's not that. I'm not an expert in this area. I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing. There's some source of inflammation happening there, and that's probably contributing.
Got it. And for another time, the whole concept of things that go away on their own versus you need intervention is also such a mystery, especially with babies, but also with, adults, like things that just your body figures out how to resolve on its own. And then others where like you really need to do something different in order to change that and make that stop happening. So
well, I love that you said that, because that's a perfect example of how resilient our body is. It's always working to bring us back to balance, or bring us back to optimal health. And, I think that like acne, like this is why I tell people with acne, like it's actually a blessing in disguise, because it's alerting you to inflammation inside your body. Not everyone is so lucky, right? A lot of people have inflammation in their body and they don't know until it's too late, until they get a very scary diagnosis, or, something happens to them that's a lot worse than a pimple. So, that's not to minimize acne or anything like that. But I think, realizing that your body is always trying to help you out. When we have rashes and breakouts of whatever, it's communication. That's all it is. It's communication. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with your body. In fact, your body is probably doing exactly what it needs to do based on whatever inputs you're giving it.
I love that you said that. I say that all the time too about like people with period issues. Women are so lucky to have this monthly report card to alert them to issues in their body. And so cramps are terrible and mood swings are terrible and this and that, but also so lucky because you get to get that communication and do something about it. Men don't have that monthly report card, right? They don't have as many ways through their body to communicate with them that things are not quite right and give them an opportunity to correct, course correct before something more serious happens. To not to end on a morbid note, but I know somebody that I grew up with who just died at the age of 40 or 41 as a result of complications with getting COVID, but it was discovered that she had undiagnosed like early stage heart disease. And it wasn't manifesting in a symptom until COVID really, sort of let it take control or let it get, really out of hand. And she passed away. And it was so awful and sad. And I just wish there had been some way for her to get that communication from her body earlier. Maybe she did in some way and didn't pay attention to it or was trying to work on it a little bit. But I think these sources of communication like pain or skin issues or digestive issues, not being able to go to the bathroom or having diarrhea, these are all ways that we can course correct before more serious things happen. And so having the mindset of not like, acne sucks or like, I hate my skin or whatever, but really embracing like, thank you for telling me, let me do something about it, is such a great way to not only improve your health and your skin, but have just better energy, more positive energy within your body. So, Maria, thank you for sharing so much great information on acne. You are a wealth of knowledge. I know that you are doing lots with, helping people with acne right now. So please tell the WellBe audience where they can find you.
You guys can find me on mariamarlowe.com, and Marlowe is spelled Marlowe. I have my Clear Skin Plan there, which is a program that walks you through 90 days of changing your habits to improve your skin from within, which is actually, by the time this is posting, being turned into an app. So that's very exciting.
Yes. I'm very excited to see it and try it. I'm luckily not dealing with acne, but I just want to play around with it. And so I can advise anybody else who is dealing with it how to fix it using your app. So this is great. Very exciting. Thank you again for being on the show, and everybody else, thank you for listening.
So that's all for this episode. I hope you have a much better understanding now of how acne is created and how it can be prevented and eliminated. Links to Maria's work and other research associated with this episode you'll find in the written version of this episode on getwellbe.com, and that link is in the show notes. Also, while you're there, make sure you become a WellBe Insider so that you get all of our latest content, special offers, and personal notes I don't share anywhere else weekly in your inbox. Plus, you'll get a free copy of my audio guide on how to feel the best you've ever felt and heal anything. The 10 things you need to optimize your health and heal any health issue, big or small, naturally. Even if you're the healthiest person out there, I promise you'll learn something you didn't know that can help to optimize your health. If you haven't already and found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the podcast. This way you'll never miss a new episode and they'll be delivered to you whenever we publish a new one. And please write that quick review if you haven't already. All right, this is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks for listening to the Wellbe Podcast.